Hey everyone, welcome back to Inside Thailand. Today's story comes from Alan, a retired finance professional from Manchester, a man who built his whole life on logic, caution, and numbers that always had to add up. Until Thailand handed him one that didn't, he thought he'd found peace, good weather, good company, and a woman who made him believe in kindness again. But what started with a smile at a coffee shop ended with 2 funerals for the same man, and a lie so convincing, even an expert couldn't see it coming. Alan wasn't scammed in a bar or tricked on a dating app. He was taken in broad daylight by someone who made him feel useful, loved, and seen. Until it all unravelled in a way he never could have imagined. It's raw, it's shocking, and it's a reminder that sometimes the biggest cons don't happen in the street. They happen in your heart. Here's Alan's story in his own words. Hey there, I don't usually write things like this. I'm not one for confessionals or drama, but I've been watching your channel for a while and it seems like every bloke who ends up on here has a version of my story. I used to laugh at them, thought they were fools. Now, I'm one of them. My name's Alan Reeves. I'm 54 from Manchester. I used to work in corporate finance. Spent half my life in meetings, spreadsheets, and risk assessments. I was the guy who spotted irregularities before they turned into lawsuits. The man you called when you wanted your numbers checked. I was good at it too. Cold, logical, methodical. And that's what makes this so bloody humiliating. 3 years ago, I sold my flat, left my job, and moved to Thailand. I told myself I was done with the noise, done with deadlines, ex-wives, and the kind of British weather that makes you question existence every February. I bought a modest condo in Khon Kaen. Nothing fancy, just a quiet life and a balcony that overlooked a little river. I'd wake up early, drink coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sit outside while the city came to life. For the first time in years, I felt content. No alarms, no emails, no one needing anything from me. And then she appeared. Noi worked in the cafe across the street, always smiling, always saying hello when I walked past. I didn't pay much attention at first. She was half my age for one, and I'd sworn off women after my second divorce. But she had this way of talking to you that made you feel seen. Not in that forced service industry politeness. She looked right at you when she spoke, like you mattered. The first time we actually spoke properly, I'd forgotten my phone charger on the counter. She ran out after me, calling my name, or what she thought was my name, Mr. Allen. I turned around, and there she was, breathless, holding it out like she'd just rescued something important. You forget. You busy man, maybe. I laughed. Not anymore, she smiled. And I swear it wasn't one of those tourist smiles you see in Bangkok. It was softer, genuine, the kind that sneaks past your guard. Over the weeks that followed, I became a regular. Same table, same coffee, same smile waiting for me. She remembered how I liked it. Strong, no sugar. We'd talk about little things. Her English wasn't perfect, but it was good enough for stories about her family, her dreams, and how she worked 2 jobs to take care of her father, who was sick. I liked that about her. She wasn't lazy, didn't ask for anything, never hinted at money. Looking back now, that was the hook. She made me feel useful again. After decades of clients, numbers, and women who only spoke to me through lawyers, it felt human. She'd laugh at my jokes, even the bad ones, and sometimes she'd brush my arm when she brought the coffee, just enough to make me forget I was supposed to be smarter than this. That's how it started. Innocent, ordinary, nothing dramatic. Just 2 people having coffee in the quiet mornings of Khon Kaen. But here's the thing, no one tells you. Scams don't start with lies. They start with kindness. And that's what she gave me. Kindness. or something that looked a lot like it. It started small, the kind of connection that slips under your skin before you realise it's even there. I'd walk into that cafe and she'd already be grinding the beans, my cup ready before I'd even sat down. She'd ask about my day, roll her eyes when I pretended to complain about retirement being too relaxing, and sit with me during her breaks. We'd talk about nothing and everything. Her English was patchy but charming, and she'd show me photos on her phone of her family. Her niece, her mum, and always her father. He was in nearly every picture, a thin man with the kind of face that looked carved by the sun. He'd be sitting outside their wooden house, holding a cup of tea or a fighting rooster, always smiling. She spoke about him with such warmth and reverence that it caught me off guard. She said he'd been a rice farmer all his life, that he'd worked himself half to death and now couldn't afford the hospital visits he needed. I didn't know why it hit me the way it did. Maybe because I'd never been that close with my own dad. Maybe because she made it sound noble, this endless struggle that nobody ever thanked him for. When she found out what I used to do for work, she seemed fascinated. "Finance?" she said, stretching the word like it was something mystical. "You make big money before, right?" I told her I'd done well enough to quit early. She smiled in that way that made you feel like you'd just impressed a teacher and said softly, "So clever. You look serious. But you have a good heart." It was such a simple line, but it stuck. Back in England, people called me efficient, reliable, on time. No one had ever said I had a good heart. Hearing it from her felt like oxygen. A week or two later, she brought me a notebook from her job. Her boss, she said, was cheating her out of overtime pay. The pages were a mess of scribbles and receipts. I spent an afternoon sorting through it all, adding up the numbers and explaining what she was actually owed. She watched me like I was solving a crime scene. When I finished, she clapped her hands and grinned. "You so smart, Mr. Allen. You make everything clear." I hadn't realised how much I'd missed being useful until that moment. From then on, we started seeing each other outside of the cafe. Little dinners after her shift, street food, grilled fish, beers by the roadside. She'd insist on paying sometimes, just to prove she wasn't using me. If I protested, she'd glare and say, "If you pay, you think I'm like other girls." I liked that she had pride, or at least that she made me believe she did. It gave everything a sense of dignity, as if what we had wasn't transactional, just human. Over time, her stories grew heavier. She talked about the bills from her father's treatments, about her family borrowing money from loan sharks, about the sleepless nights worrying if he'd make it through another rainy season. One evening she said, "Sometimes I wish I can take care of him like you take care of me." I remember feeling a lump in my throat. That was the moment I started thinking of her as someone I could protect, someone who needed me. Looking back, it's clear now what she was doing. She wasn't confiding in me. She was taking my measure, testing how far kindness could stretch before it became obligation. She never asked me for money, not then. She just laid the groundwork, painting the picture and letting me fill in the blanks. I told myself it was just friendship, maybe something gentle growing between us, but the truth is, she already knew exactly who I was and what string to pull next. That's what still stings. She read me like a spreadsheet, line by line, weakness by weakness, until wasn't a man to her anymore. I was a calculation waiting to be solved. It's strange how quickly routine becomes dependence. Before I knew it, my mornings didn't start until I saw her. I'd walk into that cafe, pretending it was about the coffee, but it wasn't. It was her. She'd tease me for checking my watch, saying, "You come same time every day, like clock." Then she'd tap her chest and grin. I'm your alarm now. I laughed it off, but she wasn't wrong. I'd structured my days around her without even realising it. When her father's health took a turn, the tone between us shifted. She stopped wearing makeup, started looking tired, and one morning her hands trembled as she poured the coffee. She apologised, said she hadn't slept. Her father was in the hospital again, struggling to breathe. I asked what the doctors said, and she shrugged, staring at the counter. They say need machine to help him, but expensive. She didn't look at me when she said it. She didn't have to. I told myself I wasn't getting involved. I'd already made her spreadsheets, helped her balance a few bills, but that night, when she called crying, her voice cracking through the phone, saying she didn't know what to do, I found myself driving her to the hospital. I waited outside while she went in to see him, sitting in the car watching the fluorescent lights flicker through the windows. I should have known that kind of emotion, that kind of chaos had nothing to do with me. But when she came back out, red-eyed and shaking, she collapsed against me like the world had ended, whispering, "You're the only one who helps me." That sentence did me in. I didn't hear it as manipulation, I heard it as meaning. After years of working in an industry where everything had a number and every kindness had a cost, here was someone who made me feel like I mattered again. I wasn't just Alan the accountant or Alan the divorcee. I was Alan, the man who could fix things. I drove her home, and she fell asleep in the passenger seat with her head tilted against the window, her hair blowing in the aircon, her hand resting in her lap. She looked so small, so fragile. I remember thinking I'd do anything to make her stop crying. The next few weeks, she leaned on me more. I'd get messages in the middle of the night, photos of medicine, bills, or her sitting in a hospital chair beside her father's bed. I transferred a few thousand baht here and there, nothing major at first. It felt good. I told myself it wasn't charity, it was compassion. Besides, I wasn't short of money. What's a few thousand to a man who spent 20 years making other people rich? But she knew exactly how to keep me hooked. Whenever I tried to draw a line, she'd back away. "You busy?" "I don't want to disturb," she'd say. Eyes down, all soft voice and sadness. Then she'd vanish for days, and I'd find myself restless, missing her messages. When she returned, it was always the same. Apologies, smiles, a gentle hand on my arm. I'd cave every time. One night, after another hospital visit, she thanked me for everything I'd done. We were parked outside her building, the engine off, the air heavy with humidity. She said quietly, "You good man, Alan. Thai men never help like you. You care." There was nothing flirtatious about it. It was worse than that. It sounded honest, and maybe it was, in its own twisted way. That was the night she kissed me for the first time. Not passionate, not romantic, just soft, deliberate, and final. Like she was closing a deal. I didn't realise it then, but that's exactly what it was. In my head, I'd already started writing a story where I was the saviour, the man who stepped in and made life better for the woman who'd never had a chance. I didn't see the con, not yet. I just saw a purpose. And after years of drifting, purpose felt like love. I was wrong on both counts. It was just after midnight when she called. I remember because I'd been half asleep on the balcony, drink in hand, watching the lights from a far-off temple flicker across the water. The phone buzzed, and when I picked up, I could barely understand her through the sobbing. "Papa gone," she kept saying. "He stopped breathing." Her voice cracked like it hurt to speak. By the time I got to her place, she was pacing outside, clutching her phone and shaking. Her neighbours stood nearby, watching, whispering. She looked at me like I was the only person who could make sense of it all. "I go home now," she said. Need to make ceremony. But I don't know how to pay. I should have stopped there. I should have said, let me think, or let's talk tomorrow. But I didn't. I told her I'd drive her to her village, no questions asked. We set off before dawn in my old pickup, the air still thick from the rain. She cried quietly most of the way, staring out the window. I kept telling her it was going to be okay, that she'd done everything she could. I must have said it 10 times. I was trying to fill the silence, but deep down, I think I just wanted to hear myself sound like the kind of man who could fix things. When we arrived, the village was already awake. Chickens running loose, fires burning, everyone moving with that grim efficiency you only see in rural funerals. I remember stepping out of the truck and immediately feeling out of place. A tall, sunburned Farang in a black shirt, clutching a bag of groceries, because I didn't know what else to bring. She took my hand like a lifeline and led me to the house. Inside, candles flickered around a framed photo of her father, draped in white cloth. The smell of incense hit me so hard it made my eyes water. People came up to me one by one, nodding, thanking me. Old women pressed my hand and said things I didn't understand. A monk smiled and bowed. Someone put a garland around my neck. The whole thing felt surreal. I wasn't a guest. I was being cast as a saviour in a play I hadn't auditioned for. And it worked. I fell right into the role. When they mentioned the hospital debt, I didn't hesitate. I told them I'd cover it. The words came out before I'd even thought about them. 1.2 million baht. I remember the number because I transferred it the same day, sitting cross-legged on the floor beside her, surrounded by relatives murmuring blessings. Noi cried into my shoulder, saying she'd never forget what I'd done. You like family now, she said. That night, after everyone had left, I sat outside with her under a bare bulb. She was quiet, exhausted, eyes puffy from crying. She looked at me and whispered, "You make my father proud. He see you help, he smile in heaven." I nodded like I believed it. Hell, maybe I did. I felt something warm in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. That stupid, dangerous pride that comes from thinking you've done the right thing. The next morning, when I woke up in the guest room, the monks were already chanting again. The sun was barely up, and I could hear the rhythmic beat of wooden bells. I stepped outside, still groggy, and watched them prepare for the cremation. The whole thing had an eerie beauty, smoke curling through the trees, the sound of mourning that was almost musical. I stood there, hands in pockets, feeling like I was part of something sacred. Looking back now, it's almost funny how convincing it all was. The crying, the rituals, the gratitude, it had all the texture of truth. And me, the clever ex-accountant who'd spent his career catching inconsistencies, didn't notice the one detail that didn't add up. I never saw the body, not once. For a while, things were peaceful again, or at least they looked that way. After the funeral, Noi came back to Khon Kaen with me and stayed at my condo for a few weeks. She said being alone in the village made her think too much. I didn't argue. I liked having her there. She cooked, cleaned, sat next to me on the balcony in the evenings. She'd lean her head on my shoulder and say she didn't know what she'd do without me. At first she was quiet, fragile, like a woman still deep in mourning. But little by little, the old Noi came back. She laughed more, teased me again, even started talking about opening her own cafe one day. I told her I'd help her with the business plan, and that was my mistake. The moment I said it, I saw a flicker in her eyes. Interest? Calculation? She thanked me, kissed my cheek, and said, "You make my dream possible." Money wasn't mentioned again for a while, but she had new ways of reminding me she was struggling. I'd find hospital envelopes on the counter or see messages pop up on her phone from her cousin asking for help. If I asked, she'd shrug and say, just family things. I offered small amounts, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. She'd refuse at first, make a show of pushing my hand away, and then finally sigh and accept. You're too kind, she'd say, every single time. But then came the first real argument. She wanted to go home to visit her mother for a few weeks. I said, of course, no problem. Then she asked if she could borrow my truck for the trip. That was where I drew the line. I told her I wasn't comfortable with that. It was insured in my name. Her face changed in an instant. The sweetness drained away, and she looked at me with something sharp and cold. You don't trust me, she said quietly. It sounds ridiculous now, but that look made me feel guilty, like I was the one doing something wrong. I ended up handing her the keys. She hugged me, said she'd bring back gifts for my friends, and left the next morning. She was gone nearly a month, barely messaged. When she finally came back, she had a new phone, gold bracelet, and a story about how her relatives had insisted on buying her presents because I'd been so generous at the funeral. I wanted to believe her, so I did. The routine resumed. Cafe visits, dinners, quiet nights. But something was off. She was distant, often distracted, and I caught her deleting messages once when she thought I wasn't looking. When I asked who she was talking to, she snapped, "You think I'm bad, girl?" I told her no, of course not, but the seed was planted. Still, I told myself she was grieving, that people change when they lose someone they love. I convinced myself the tension, the small lies, the missing money, it was all part of her coping. I didn't want to see what was really happening. One evening, as we sat outside, watching the rain slide down the glass, she turned to me and said, "You know, my family talk about you all the time. They say you are like a blessing from heaven." I remember smiling at that, but inside, I felt a strange chill. It wasn't gratitude I heard in her tone, it was ownership. I didn't realise it then, but the funeral hadn't ended anything. It had just opened the door. I'd stepped straight into her story and she wasn't done writing it yet. It was a Sunday afternoon when the illusion cracked. I was at home going through my usual routine, coffee, football highlights, a pointless scroll through social media when a photo stopped me cold. It was a tagged post from some woman in Noise Village, a group shot at what looked like a temple fair. There were lanterns, beer bottles, people smiling, and right in the middle, holding up a glass like he'd just won the lottery, was her father, alive, grinning, very much not cremated. For a moment I thought I was mistaken. Maybe it was an old picture. Maybe it was the uncle who supposedly looked just like him. But the caption killed that theory fast. The date was recent. The post said something about a happy day. My stomach twisted. I zoomed in again, desperate to make sense of it. It was the same man from the funeral photo, the same shirt, the same mole near his eye. There was no mistaking him. When Noi came over that evening, she acted normal, chatting about dinner, asking if I wanted to watch a movie. I could barely look at her. Finally I asked, "Noi, your father? How's he doing?" She froze for half a second, just long enough to confirm what I already knew, then smiled faintly. "You mean my uncle?" "My uncle, same face, you know. People always say they look like twins." I kept my voice calm. "You said your father died, Noi. I paid for the hospital, the funeral, everything. Are you sure you're not mistaken?" Her eyes narrowed just slightly. Then came the tears. Instant, perfect, like she'd practiced. "Why you say this? You don't trust me?" She buried her face in her hands, shaking, and for a moment I felt guilty, like I'd accused a saint. I told myself I'd misread it, that grief does strange things to people, that Facebook could be misleading. Anything to quiet that gnawing doubt. Over the next few days, I tried to be normal, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. Every time my phone pinged, my heart raced. I caught myself checking her social media again and again, like a madman looking for confirmation of his own stupidity. Then came the final insult. She sent me a message late one night, a photo of herself at another ceremony, dressed in black, captioned, "I'm sorry I can't talk." My father gone again. That was the moment I stopped feeling confused and started feeling sick. I realised then that she wasn't careless. She wasn't desperate. She was rehearsed. She'd learned how to lie in layers, the kind of lies that bend logic just enough to make you doubt your own senses. I poured myself a drink and stared at that photo until the ice melted. My father used to tell me, "Son, you can't con an honest man." I'd built a career believing that, sitting there in that dim condo, staring at the woman who had made me question everything. I finally understood how wrong he was. You don't have to be dishonest to be conned. You just have to want something badly enough. Love, redemption, a little warmth, and they'll use it against you like a weapon. And Noi? She knew exactly what I wanted. It was barely 2 months later when the nightmare started again. I woke to the sound of my phone buzzing on the bedside table. 3 missed calls, all from Noi, then a message. "Please, Alan, I need you." My father gone again. I stared at the words, blinking like maybe my tired eyes had read them wrong. Gone again. The same phrasing, the same urgency. Every rational cell in my body told me not to answer. But of course, I did. Her voice on the line was frantic, breathless, the same exact tone she'd used the first time. "I can't talk," she said between sobs. "I go back to my village. I need to make ceremony quickly. No time. Please, you understand." I sat there in silence, heart pounding, feeling like someone had dropped me back into a nightmare I hadn't finished having. My mind was screaming, "It's fake! She's lying!" But there's something about panic that short-circuits logic. I just wanted to see it with my own eyes, to prove it wasn't what it looked like. I told her I'd come, and before I knew it, I was in the truck again, driving through the endless stretches of farmland toward her village, anger simmering under my skin. When I pulled up, it was déjà vu. The same decorations, the same black banners, the same house with the same framed photo of her father on the altar. I stood there staring at it, my blood running cold. The date on the ribbon was new, but everything else was identical. Even the smell, that heavy mix of incense and burning paper. Villagers moved around mechanically, glancing at me, whispering. Noi came running out, tears streaking her cheeks. She threw herself at me, clutching my shirt. "You come, thank God you come," she said. I pushed her back gently, forcing her to look at me. "Noi," I said slowly, "I want to see him." She froze, just like before, her eyes darting to the house. "He already cremated," she said quickly. "This time so fast." Hospital say cannot wait. It was all too perfect, too rehearsed. I walked past her and into the house. The same photo, same candles, same offering bowls. Except this time there were beer bottles on the table. It didn't look like mourning. It looked like a gathering. And that's when I noticed the laughter outside. I stepped back onto the porch and saw them, a group of men sitting under a tree, drinking, joking, and among them the unmistakable face of the man himself, her father, alive, smiling, telling a story, his voice loud and confident, the same man I'd supposedly paid to bury 6 months earlier. I don't even remember walking over to them. I just remember my voice shaking as I said, "He's alive. He's not dead." Noi started crying again, but the tears didn't look real anymore. She grabbed my arm, babbling in Thai, saying things like bad luck, misunderstanding, I can explain. The villagers just watched. Nobody intervened. Nobody said a word. I shouted, louder than I've shouted in my life. You lied to me! Twice. You made me pay for a dead man who's standing right there drinking beer. One of the old men tried to calm me down, but I wasn't having it. My hands were trembling so badly I had to clench them into fists to stop myself from shaking. Noi's face hardened then. The crying stopped, just like that. She looked up at me with this cold, detached calm and said, You wanted to help. You said you love me. You said you want my family happy. So why are you angry now? That line hit me harder than anything. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even arrogance. It was contempt. Like she was mocking me for ever thinking it was about love. I turned and walked away while she kept talking, her voice following me down the dirt road. I didn't remember driving home, just gripping the wheel so hard my fingers ached. Somewhere between rage and humiliation, it sank in. I hadn't just been conned. I'd been played with. Deliberately, repeatedly. And she'd done it with a smile. When I got back to the condo, I poured a drink, sat in silence, and stared at the wall until sunrise. The words kept looping in my head like a curse. You wanted to help. You said you love me. That was the night I realised she'd never scammed me for money. That was just a bonus. What she really enjoyed was watching me believe every word. I didn't plan on going back. I told myself I'd leave it alone, let it rot where it belonged. But that kind of humiliation doesn't fade. It festers. Every time I looked in the mirror, I saw her words staring back at me. You wanted to help. You said you love me. I'd never felt rage like it. It wasn't loud at first. It was quiet, steady, clinical, the kind of fury that builds in men who are used to keeping their composure. 3 days later, I found myself back on that same road, my truck kicking up dust behind me. I told myself I just wanted closure, some kind of explanation. But the truth was simpler. I wanted to look her in the eye and make her say it, make her admit what she'd done. When I pulled up, the village looked exactly the same as before, as if nothing had happened. Kids playing in the dirt, dogs sleeping in the shade. And there she was, sitting on a wooden bench outside the house, scrolling through her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She looked up, saw me, and for a moment the mask slipped. Her smile vanished. Then she put it right back on. You come back, she said, her tone almost cheerful. You want to talk? I didn't bother answering. I walked past her and straight into the house. The place was quiet, but the smell of incense still lingered. Her father was there too, sitting in the corner, pretending to sleep. I looked at him and said, You should have stayed dead the first time. He didn't respond, didn't even look ashamed. Noi followed me in, her voice suddenly soft, almost tender. You angry because I lie? But I lie for family. You help us. We thank you. That calmness, that complete lack of guilt, snapped something in me. I turned and shouted, You didn't lie for your family, you lied because it was easy. Because you knew I'd believe you. My voice cracked, louder than I meant, echoing through the house. The villagers outside stopped what they were doing. I could feel eyes watching from every direction. She stood there, arms crossed, head tilted slightly, not a single tear this time. You think I bad person, she said quietly. You rich. You have more money than you need. You happy when you give. So we both get what we want. That line hit harder than any slap. She said it with this frightening calm, like she was explaining a business transaction. No shame, No remorse, just logic. You pay, she continued. You feel good. I use money. My family eat. Everybody win. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to scream, to throw something, to shake her until that smug expression cracked. But all I could do was stand there, shaking my head. You think this was winning? I said. You think taking kindness and turning it into a con makes you clever? She gave a half smile, not sweet this time, but cruel. No, she said. It make me smart. It make you stupid. Something in me went very still. All the anger, the disbelief, the confusion, it just drained out, leaving this awful hollow quiet. I looked at her one last time, really looked at her, and saw what I'd been refusing to see from the start. She didn't care about money or security. What she wanted was control. She wanted to see how far she could push me, how much I'd give, how much I'd endure before I broke. I didn't say another word. I just walked out, got in my truck, and drove. As I pulled away, I saw her in the rearview mirror, standing there in the doorway, completely still. She didn't call out. She didn't cry. She just watched me go with that same faint smile, like she'd won. By the time I reached Khon Kaen, the rage had cooled into something worse, disgust. Not at her, at myself. I'd spent a lifetime catching other people's lies, but I'd walked straight into hers because I wanted to, because I liked the way she made me feel when she looked at me like I mattered. And that's when it hit me. She didn't steal 2.5 million baht. She stole my dignity, and I handed it over with both hands. The morning after I left her village, I sat in my condo staring at the wall, feeling hollow. My phone buzzed non-stop, but I didn't have it in me to look. I already knew what it would say. Excuses, guilt, maybe even a thank you. None of it mattered. That day I did something I hadn't done in years. Opened my banking app and checked the damage. 2.4 million baht gone. 2.5 million for lies, smiles, and a man who'd raised a beer to me from his own funeral. I could afford it, but that wasn't the point. It wasn't about the money. It was about being played, publicly, stupidly, completely. I didn't tell anyone. How do you explain something like that? The man who used to spot frauds for a living, fooled by a girl half his age? I imagined my old colleagues laughing over pints. Bloody hell, Alan, didn't you check the receipt? A week later she texted, "You forgive me?" That was it. No apology, no explanation. Just testing if the hook was still in. I blocked her number, then her Facebook. A few days later, someone sent me a photo of her in Bangkok. New clothes, new man, same grin. That's when it hit me. She hadn't just taken my money. She'd taken the version of myself I'd been proud of. The man who saw through everything. I'd spent years protecting people from scams, but I'd never protected myself from loneliness. It cost me 2.5 million baht to learn that lesson. It's been over a year now, and I still think about her more often than I'd like to admit. Not because I miss her, I don't, but because she's the reminder I can't shake. Every time someone calls me mate or smiles too quickly, I hear her voice again, soft and rehearsed. You have good heart. I walk past that old cafe sometimes. It's under new management now, brighter, cleaner, impersonal. I sit near the window, order my coffee black, and watch the world move on. Nobody there knows who I am or what happened, and that's fine. I don't want pity. I just want to understand how a man who spent his career spotting lies could fall for one that simple. The truth is, I didn't get scammed because I was stupid. I got scammed because I was lonely. Because after 2 divorces, a lifetime of deadlines, and too many quiet nights, I wanted to believe that kindness still existed. That someone saw me as more than a wallet or a cautionary tale. I wanted to feel like I mattered again. That's the part that still stings. It wasn't her tears or the fake funerals or the money. It was realising that she never once saw me as a person, just a target who'd already decided to believe. And she was right. I handed her the blueprint. I told her exactly what kind of man I was: careful, proud, generous. And she used every bit of it against me. These days, I still live in Khon Kaen. I haven't gone back to dating, and I probably never will. But I'm not bitter, just awake. When people ask me what Thailand taught me, I tell them this: it's not the heat, or the culture, or the scams that get you. It's your own need to feel seen. So yeah, I paid for her father's funeral twice, and maybe, in a way, the second one wasn't for him at all. Maybe it was for the man I used to be, the one who thought he was too smart to ever be fooled. Because that man's dead and gone now, and I'm the one who buried him. That was Alan's story. A man who spent his whole life protecting others from being taken advantage of until the person he needed to protect most was himself. 2.5 million baht, 2 fake funerals, one man's pride stripped down to nothing. It's easy to call him foolish, but the truth is, what happened to Alan could happen to anyone who comes here looking for something they've lost: love, warmth, purpose. Thailand has a way of giving you all three and taking them back twice as fast. Alan thought he was helping a woman in need. What he was really doing was feeding his own loneliness, and she saw that long before he did. That's what makes stories like this so dangerous. They don't start with lies. They start with kindness. And by the time you notice the difference, it's already too late. If you've been through something like Alan, or know someone who has, share it in the comments below. These stories remind us that no matter how smart, how cautious, or how experienced we think we are, the heart doesn't use logic. Thanks for watching, and if you want to hear more true stories from the men who learned the hard way, subscribe, like, and stay tuned. Because here in Thailand, truth and illusion often look exactly the same.